Hi, thanks for joining me today for this edition of the Bell Video Blog. I'm Eric Bjornstead with Bell Performance. Today we're going to talk about possible reduction in the amount of ethanol in the nation's fuel supply, or at least that's what the December 2013 meeting between the EPA and Congress and industry leaders, that is what they were discussing. So let's unpack some of these details, see if we can find out a little bit more about this. In order to understand the whole issue of ethanol and why it's in our nation's fuel supply to begin with, you have to go back to the Clean Air Act and the Renewable Fuels Standard. Now, the Clean Air Act came first in the early 90s. The Renewable Fuel Standards came about in the mid-2000s, 2007, I believe. And the Renewable Fuel Standard, otherwise known as the RFS, that was put into law by Congress. That's the first thing to remember. Congress put the Renewable Fuel Standard into law, and the RFS dictates in any given year the total amount of biofuels, i.e. ethanol, is to be present in the nation's fuel supply. Now, in 2007, the RFS dictated that by the time 2014 rolled around, we were supposed to be using about 12 billion gallons of these renewable fuels. And that's about what we're doing. Now, the problem comes when you start looking forward and you see that there's some pretty sizable, i.e. huge increases that are scheduled to be coming along within the next 10 years. 10 years from now, we're actually not 10 years from now, 8 years from now, we're supposed to be increased from 12 billion gallons to like 33 billion gallons. That's like almost a tripling of the amount if you can do your math like me. And that's a problem because there are several issues that industry leaders were trying to warn the EPA and Congress about. Okay, first one is what's called the blend wall. Now, the blend wall has to do with the mathematics of how much total ethanol you're supposed to be blending into the fuel supply and the percentage that you're supposed to be blending it at. Right now, the most of the ethanol in the country is blended in at 10%. There's a few pockets of 15%, which we talked about. There's a few areas of 85%, really scattered around the country, but by and large, it's 10%. Now, 12 billion gallons of ethanol, essentially a 10% cap for all intents and purposes. However, if you're going to triple that amount, then you've got to change a couple of other things. Because mathematically, you can't take the same amount of fuel that we've been using and then tell everyone to triple the amount of ethanol in it, but at the same time tell them, oh, by the way, you have to triple it, but you still can't go over 10%. The mathematics doesn't work. That is the blend wall. And in order to get past that, you either have to use more gas or you have to increase the percentage that you're blending in there, or else you have no choice but to reduce that 33%. Cut it back. I mean, why is it 33 billion gallons? Now, why were we scheduled for such a huge increase? Well, that goes back to the danger of projections and trying to predict the future. In 2007, things were different. We were in the middle of the Iraq War. We were using gas like there was no tomorrow. And the people who were drafting the law kind of looked into the future and said, well, hey, we've always used more gas. 2014 comes around, 2022 comes around, we're going to be using tons more gas. So, that means we need to increase the amount of ethanol to keep up with that. Unfortunately for the people who are trying to predict the future, what's happened is that gas use in the United States has actually gone down, not up. We have more fuel-efficient cars, people driving, well, I was going to say people drive more hybrids, but, let's be real, that's not really a significant reducer. But people are being more efficient. Bottom line, gas use has not risen as much as it was projected to have risen in 2007. So that's the first problem. People aren't using as much gas, so therefore you have to reduce the amount of ethanol to keep the percentages the same. Of course, people who like ethanol, people in the Midwest, are all for increasing the percentages nationwide from 10 to 15 or even 20%. But there has been a lot of talk against that, and we can't see that really being a viable option. So that kind of puts Congress in a little bit of a hard spot because they don't really have any choice, but they have to reduce it. A couple of other things to keep in mind. Another thing that the industry leaders are concerned about is the cost of these renewable credits, what they call RINs. If you never heard of a RIN, an R-I-N, it is basically a credit similar to a carbon credit. And these RINs are fees that businesses pay in order to get out of having to have renewable fuel usage. Now, these are bought and sold on the open market, and the total amount that businesses spend on RINs yearly is in the billions of dollars. And if Congress does not rewrite the renewable fuel standard, then these businesses are going to be forced essentially to just kind of throw up their hands and say, there's no way we can use that much ethanol, we're just going to have to buy these RINs. And so it's going to cost businesses more and more, and the ultimate goal of all this, which is reducing petroleum consumption, is not going to be accomplished anyway. So right now, it is April of 2014. They had the meeting in December. I think they are still in the stages of getting comments from interested parties. So as soon as something is decided on this, we will definitely let you know, both in the Bell blog and also probably in one of these video blogs as well. Last thing to consider, though, this issue of who exactly is to blame for all of this. We know that the EPA really gets a lot of flack whenever anything having to do with ethanol is discussed. The EPA and ethanol are inexorably linked. You cannot think of one without the other. But to be fair, the real problem, well, not the real problem, but if you're going to blame somebody in this situation, don't blame the EPA. You have to blame Congress. There's the one thing to keep in mind in all of this. Congress is the one that sets the law. In this case, the law that governs all of this is the Renewable Fuel Standard. Congress sets the law. The EPA does not tell Congress this is what you have to do. It's the other way around. Congress directs the EPA, this is the law, now you have to go enforce the law. So, and then the EPA gets people to change behavior, hopefully, by making its own mandates with an eye towards getting people to satisfy ultimately whatever law Congress has told them to. So if you're unhappy about ethanol, if you're having ethanol problems, if you don't like the direction of the country with respect to that, you're wasting your time if you run around blaming the EPA. What you really need to be doing is talking to your congressperson, to your representative, to your senator, because it is Congress ultimately that is not at fault, but is responsible if somebody doesn't like what our country is doing with respect to ethanol and renewable fuels. So that's what we have for today. Thanks for joining me with the Bell Video Blog. I am Eric Bjornstad with Bell. If you want more information on this or other topics, you can visit our website, bellperformance.com, and also wefixfuel.com. Thanks for joining me today. See you next time. Bye-bye.